I'd like to sort of welcome everybody to the big debate for 2021. Thank you so much for joining us virtually for the first time. I may not be able to see your faces, but you are the reason why we put this event on. I'm Nova Fairbank. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Norfolk Chambers of Commerce. During the event, we will welcome local business leaders and MPs to our screens to answer your questions during 4 debates. 2021 is a brave new world. The UK has now left the EU and we will spend the rest of the year transitioning towards the future. We are still dealing with the ongoing impact of COVID-19 and lockdown 3. This will require every business to step up to the plate, to think differently, to embrace the changes, the challenges and the opportunities going forward. Therefore, all of our debates are not only topical, but very relevant to you, the business community. Our first 2 debates will be about people and skills and rebuilding the economy. There will be a break around 3:10 for you to take your favourite beverage and grab a biscuit or 2, in my case 3. I know you can't verbally talk to each other, but feel free to use the chat to discuss the event. And then we will have our last 2 debates on climate change and going green and beyond Brexit. Firstly, I'd like to say a very big thank you to our event sponsor, Greater Anglia, who have been supporting this event for a number of years. The housekeeping is very different this year. There are no fire alarms scheduled, so if there is a fire alarm, it's your house, please leave. You also know better than I do where your toilets are, so again, they're on your premises. We aren't able to see you, but you can communicate with the chat function. Please use the Q&A to submit your questions. You'll notice there's 2. There is chat function, which is for general conversation, and the Q&A actually puts your questions to our panel. So make sure you get the right one. We want to involve you as our audience in today's event. So please make sure you're submitting questions on the debate that is actually being discussed. We will take future questions later. Seeing as I have such an impressive and important audience here today, can I quickly tell you about a few things we're very excited about? As many of you may know, Norfolk Chambers is on an ambitious journey of modernisation, looking to introduce changes specifically designed to ensure we are fit for purpose and able to connect, support and give voice to every business in our region for the next 125 years and beyond. Much has already been achieved and the positive feedback from our many brilliant members has genuinely been motivational to us all, but there is still more to come. I'm pleased to announce that in 2020, we launched a new digital media platform called Norfolk's Voice. It's a free-to-view platform that is home to critical business knowledge and content, so videos, podcasts, blogs, etc. It's by our member businesses for the benefit of the region's businesses. And then in January 2021, only last week, we launched the Norfolk Knowledge Hub. It's created in collaboration with key stakeholders, and it's a knowledge and skills sharing platform for all businesses. It's designed to support businesses to recover and grow, to gain knowledge and impart knowledge and gather information. So it's very exciting and it's open to every single one of you to get involved with. We'd love to hear from you. But moving on to today's debate, I'd like to introduce our headline sponsor, Jonathan Denby. He's the Head of Corporate Affairs for Greater Anglia. Jonathan, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Nova. We're really delighted here at Greater Anglia to once again sponsor the big debate. We've been involved for a number of years, as we heard, and it's really good to be here with everyone and to see such an excellent attendance at this really important event in the Norfolk business calendar. Despite all the challenges that we've all faced over the last year, very pleased to report there's been many positive developments here at Greater Anglia. Most notably, of course, we've now rolled out new trains on all our lines in Norfolk, and they are transforming the quality and the performance and the customer experience of all those services. In fact, thanks to the excellent work of all our teams through this very unusual period that we've all faced since last March, we've now got some record-breaking performance on all our routes in Norfolk, averaging over 95% punctuality on all the local lines and over 91.5% on the main line to London, all of which are historic highs. So that's a real testament to the work of our teams through often challenging and ever-changing circumstances. In addition, we now have the most environmentally friendly fleet that we've had. And again, that's something we'll probably come back to later in the agenda when we've got the panel discussion about going greener and climate change. So with all that in mind, we're very well placed, I believe, to help to welcome people back once we're back into a more positive phase and we get through the pandemic and the vaccination program has moved on sufficiently that we can start to see the lifting of restrictions. We're going to be able to, with the benefit of the new trains, which accelerate and brake quicker, speed up services. So when we get to the point where we've introduced more of the new trains at the southern end of the route as well, all the trains from Norwich to London are going to be able to travel faster, probably by up to 5 minutes, even the ones that sort of have a number of stops en route. And we're also going to be in a position to really help the region bounce back and play our part in the decarbonisation agenda going forward. So with that all in mind, we're looking forward to working with Norfolk Chamber, with local MPs, with local authorities, and all the businesses and organisations here at this event to really ensure that Norfolk bounces back and continues to thrive in the future. So thank you once again for joining us. Delighted you're all here. And with that, I'll hand you back to Nova.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll now pass over to today's host for the event, which is Carol Walker, Times radio presenter. Carol is a high-profile journalist and presenter with more than 20 years' experience as a political correspondent. Please will you welcome Carol.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I hope well this afternoon. Can I just say, first of all, how absolutely delighted I am to has to be virtual. I don't know, all of you, everyone has their own struggles and challenges during this seemingly never-ending lockdown. But I'm suffering from severe Norfolk withdrawal as I'm currently stuck in London and haven't been able to get there for many weeks now, and probably quite a few more weeks. But you can be there just as soon as possible. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I was a BBC political correspondent for more than 20 years, worked as a correspondent for the corporation for at least a decade as well. I've done a lot of work with Look East up in Norwich. I now have my own show on Times Radio. If none of you have given it, have a look online. You can get an app and there's lots of interesting discussion there. I was born and grew up in, I still count myself a Norfolk girl, and I choose every possible opportunity of on my radio show. Now, of course, and as Nova has set out, it is a difficult time for everyone, but there is at least some light at the end of the tunnel, some positive signs. The vaccine rollout seems so far, touch wood, to be going well. And there are at least hopes that within the next few months, things should be able to open up a bit. And of course, a lot of businesses will then face not just the immediate challenges of reopening, but adapting to the changed demands from their customers. So with no further ado, let's just kick on debate number one. Just going to focus on people and skills. You use the Q&A function to add in any of the questions you'd like. Some people have submitted questions in advance. I'll be trying to put them, I'll be trying to give everyone a fair shout. If any of the contributors feel they are burning to make a point, just either raise your hand visually or you can raise your hand on Zoom. Let's just welcome, first of all, Rebecca Hedden, who is co-director for R13 Recruitment. Hello, Rebecca.
Hi, Carol. Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. James Howells is director for Turning Factor. Hello, James.
Good afternoon to you all.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks so much for being with us. Karen Patterson is Deputy Group Property and Facilities Director for Aviva. Hi,
hello,
Karen.
Hi.
Yeah,
good to be here.
Great to have you there. Thanks very much indeed. We had hoped to have Chloe Smith, who of course you'll know is MP for Norwich North, but unfortunately she's been unable to make it due to unforeseen circumstances, but she does send her apologies. I'm sure that we'll find lots to chat about in any. So let me just kick off by asking you, first of all, many of us, and we're all there now, are working from home, contributing from home. And one of the initial questions I thought might be helpful for everybody listening in is to perhaps just have some tips about what we can all do professionally, personally, to try to make working from home something that is productive, that works for customers, and that works for staff. So perhaps I should start with you, Karen. I can see you there. I'm sure you have many of your staff working from home. What have you learned?
I think if I give a bit of background, first of all, almost a year ago now, wasn't it, when we first found out that we would have to adopt this new way of working. We've got 15,000 people working in the UK for Aviva, 5,000 of which are in Norwich. And as soon as the government advice came out last year, we had a huge project underway, which then made sure that all of those people could safely work from home. So that was a logistical challenge, as you can imagine. We're very proud that we managed to get everybody set up. We had to provide something like 3,000 office chairs, 1,500 desks, as well as laptops, headsets, phones, everything, to make sure that everybody could do as good a job as they could working at home in very difficult circumstances. So I think, and we're really proud of how we managed that. Here we are almost a year on now, and again, we have nearly all of our offices shut. We only have them open for people who are really needing to work in the office. So of that 15,000 people I talked about just then, we've got about 200 people working in offices across the UK. So, you know, vastly reduced. So as you say, most of our people are at home. And I'm really pleased to say that we've managed to keep the business going. In fact, some of our customer satisfaction scores have been higher than they had been before. And everyone has made an enormous effort to pull together and really make this work. So I think in terms of making it work, the main thing I think is to make sure that we're looking after people and making sure that the people's well-being is absolutely top of our agenda, keeping people safe and well-being. Now, obviously, everyone's had different pressures, different things to deal with at home, whether that's homeschooling, elderly relatives, not be able to see family and friends. Have a lot of people who are single, who have been at home on their own and coping with mental issues. So the main thing we've been trying to do in Aviva is really make sure about people's well-being. And there's been a whole series of interventions and things that we've had happening. So we've got all sorts of stuff happening, like virtual Keep Fit classes and yoga, which people are joining in with. We've got virtual book groups. We've got a choir, all sorts of things happening online, and people have been incredibly inventive. The main thing we've tried to do is make sure everyone's very up to date and we keep on top of anything new coming out from the government to make sure we're absolutely reacting as we should to keep people safe. We've been advocating making sure that people get time out of their day to go outside, have a walk, look after themselves. And we've done things like, for example, everybody's been given an extra day of holiday. So we've got a well-being day, which is for somebody to take just to have a break, set themselves something to do outside of their norm, whether that's having a pamper day or cleaning their cars or anything they want to do just to get themselves into a good mental space so that they can bring their whole self to work and do their very best.
Okay, James Howells, for Turning Factor, perhaps you should just explain first of all, what does Turning Factor do?
Yeah, Turning Factor, we're a learning and development organisation. We work primarily in the area of behavioural change as well as organisational change. So we work with a cross-section of organisations, from very large organisations like Karen's to very small organisations, literally starter businesses. And I think the question is more sort of tips that we sort of would see. And one of the tips we've seen is what we have literally is not like mission creep with people are doing, is work creep. And what people are doing is they're literally spending day after hour on Zoom, and they're literally not creating any white space in their diaries for to actually have a break, or more importantly, to actually keep away from the screen. So one thing we'd recommend people to consider white space. The other thing which I think is really important from the company's perspective is to make sure we've got structure, because what people are doing is they're literally working so many hours these days, and people are sort of literally 9-10 o'clock at night still on Zoom or still actually working away, because they're sort of creating this presenteeism out online. It's like we've got to be there. The boss is going to see me if I'm not. And we were saying is the big thing now really is it's a different world out there. We've got to be managing really not from presenteeism perspective, but from outcomes and objectives. And
can I just ask you a point there, because I know, talking to a lot of people, I've been working quite a bit from home myself, and it is very difficult, and often it is the employees themselves who feel that they can't step away from the screen, that they've always got to be available to answer an email the second it comes in, and so on. And I'm sure that everyone involved in this afternoon's conference is incredibly understanding of the concerns and the other commitments that their staff have. But what would you say to someone who feels that perhaps their bosses are making unrealistic demands, that perhaps they are saying, hang on, I sent you that email half an hour ago, why haven't you replied? Why weren't you there on that conference call, and so on? What would you recommend to employees who don't think that their bosses are taking sufficient account of the difficulties that they're facing?
I think this is a real issue. That issue is very, very common. And I think it's a case of actually, you know, you've got to have honest conversations with your boss. And what I would say is you've literally got to actually take a bit of time and say, can I have a meeting? Because this is not great for me. It's not great for my productivity. And can we agree, literally manage upwards? Can we agree what's the outcomes we're looking to actually achieve? And we say sometimes you have to manage upwards as well as having the management downwards, because when a manager can't necessarily see somebody, they think that person's not working. And because they're seeing they're not working, or they're not answering that email immediately, they think they're not doing, which is completely differently. So it's so important now that the communication is enhanced. And that isn't just spending all time on Zoom. It's actually, let's talk about this. And it's away from, if you want the objective, so let's have that offline conversation and talk how it is, rather than just saying, got to achieve this, got to achieve that, got to achieve this. Let's talk about how it is and what's the best way it works for you. I had a colleague the other day said, by the way, James, he said, I've just gone for a bicycle ride. And do you know what? That pleased me. Rather than sort of, oh, you know, that's not good, because it said to me that guy's actually taken on board what we're trying to preach, and it's to give that person space. And it's what businesses need to consider. It's about managing the objectives, not the time someone's on it or actually doing. If they can achieve the objective the business wants, that's what we should be happy with, not just, oh, well, are they answering my email immediately? Because they might be doing something else, which is important to the business.
Rebecca, let me just bring you in on this one. Let me just say to everybody who is listening to this, do look at that Q&A box on your screen if you've got a question you'd like me to ask, and I've got lots more to go through. So Rebecca, do you want to just contribute quickly to how you and other businesses should be coping with staff working at home?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the points that have already been made are completely pertinent. I think the additional thing that I would add is to also incorporate an element of that social aspect. So taking time out just to ask people not about what's going on in their work day, but are they okay in their day-to-day as well? If you've got people that are happy and healthy at home, then their work output is going to be far greater. So just making time to have those conversations with people kind of off grid, essentially. We've introduced sort of coffee breaks, we've introduced weekly meetings where we can celebrate successes and support challenges, and just try to really encourage a really open forum for communication. And I appreciate that not everybody also wants to share things with the group as a whole. So we've also introduced a buddy system, just so that people have somebody within the business that they can go to with things, both work-wise and personally. And we've also created sort of a data set, essentially, and some signposting if people do need some additional help in terms of their mental well-being and health. Then we've got availability and opportunity to be able to signpost for that as well, because it's hard for people who are at home, who are by themselves, and who are used to being social beasts.
I think we all struggle with that, certainly. Lots of questions already pre-submitted. Richard Bridgman says, my company's been committed to training young people for over 25 years, now more than ever. All businesses must look to support, train and give young people opportunities. I'd like to ask the audience today, look at yourselves, are you doing enough? And perhaps while I have you there, Rebecca, I mean, are you finding that it is difficult to find opportunities for young people, particularly they won't be perhaps as finding it as easy as they might have done to get even work experience?
I think the government's Kickstart programme did businesses a really huge favour in encouraging them to try and take on young people and bring them into apprenticeships and those kind of things. And I think that there are actually lots of opportunities still available for young people, for everybody. I mean, I really hate to create this divide between people as a whole, and you know that might seem a crazy thing to say, but I think everybody should be treated equally when they're searching for jobs, regardless of their age and regardless of their capabilities. And actually there are jobs out there and there are people that can help you. I think it's just knowing about where to go to find that help.
Karen, you wanted to come in there. Tell us about what Aviva is doing on this.
Well, I was just going to mention, picking up on the point that Rebecca made there about apprentices. Next week is National Apprentice Week, which starts next Monday. And at Aviva, we've got 56 roles being advertised across the UK, 24 of those in Norwich, with the other 29 being location agnostic. So there's a huge opportunity there for some apprentices, and we absolutely haven't stopped our recruitment. We also took apprentices on last autumn. And we're in the midst of our normal graduate recruitment program at the moment. Obviously, that's a bit different to how it would have been before. Everything's online, whereas normally we would have had face-to-face interviews and team selection days and so on. That's all been moved onto Zoom and Teams, but we are still recruiting as we were before and absolutely committed to that.
Okay, I just wanted to bring in a question from Charlie Govain, who's popped the question on the Q&A function. I would encourage anybody listening to do that. He's asking, is Kickstart working? I've been trying to take on a new member of staff and applied back in September with a December start point, but this still hasn't happened. He is from Creative Arts East. It's clearly a question I would love to have put to Chloe Smith, who's not with us. Is anyone on the panel like to address the point that Charlie raises?
Yeah, I just from my perspective, I know as an organisation we are trying to apply, so we've got a lot of clients that are actually wanting to do the Kickstart, and I believe they've had a massive amount of taking people saying, you know, we can offer places. I don't know how well that's going. I just wanted also to just quickly say a shout out to Richard Bridgman and Warren Services. Not only are they an amazing business, but what Richard's doing in Norfolk and has done everywhere else is for all of us, certainly the skills and sector, to admire. And I would just encourage everybody to follow his footsteps.
Thank you. And I just mentioned that Alice Whitney has also contributed on this, saying it isn't working. I assume she means 1,800 of the promised 120,000 thus far, I believe. So unfortunately, Chloe isn't here. Just one more on this, and then we're going to move on to some of the different subjects. Peter Bussey has asked why sole traders are excluded from the Kickstart scheme, saying he applied via the chamber, but it's apparently only open to companies. I'm assuming that is, I'm not familiar with the full details of Kickstart.
Well, I could help on that a little bit. What it is that it was shared with, they have a ratio for taking on people on Kickstart. It's roughly speaking, from please, hope to give you some thing, it's 1 to 3 ratio. So what they're saying is that if you're a business, you've got to have 3 staff in place to be able to take one to balance that ratio. And also, I believe they do a credit check on the company to make sure they're financially sound. So on the surfaces, it makes logical sense because they don't want individuals to exploit it. But on the other side of the fence, there's good sole traders who just want a good way of bringing and helping people into the workplace. And you know, I certainly haven't made the rules or anything else, but I think it's a positive thing to bring people on. We've experienced people wanting to take people on who are sole traders, and they've been told they can't take them on because of the guidelines.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to try and rattle through a few more questions quickly because we're racing through our time on this. Mike Fields has asked, what do you think the government should do to encourage more people to train in a career in the building industry? We will without doubt see increased pressure on tradespeople numbers now that we've left the European Union and we don't have enough youngsters training to come through and replace them. Karen, would you like to answer that question? Hello, Karen, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was on mute there. I'm not sure I'm the best qualified to talk about jobs in the building sector. Actually, I'm not sure that that's completely. I don't know if anyone else would be better placed to pick that one up. Actually, Carol.
Okay. Anyone else like to answer that? If not, we'll.
I'm quite happy to talk. I mean, I think personally, the building industry is an area where we've seen major demand in the UK, and I totally agree with the questioner. I think there's a real need, and there should be real support for the building sector to encourage for the practical trades. A lot of people are not academic. That there's, I mean, in our county, unfortunately, there's quite a you know, not so great people leaving school with no academic qualifications or not very high academic qualifications. And I think it's a great opportunity to get people into work. Certainly in the building sector, and we've got some wonderful companies in this county that have historically trained a lot of people, and it'd be great to encourage those back into bringing those people into the workplace.
Okay, just a quick one on the questions. Lots of questions coming in on Kickstart. Nova Fairbank, who I'm sure you all know from the Norfolk Chambers, says that the Norfolk Chamber of Commerce is a gateway for Kickstart. We are working closely with DWP, already have 258 placements approved. We're just waiting for the DWP to make them live. We will keep going and hope to have made progress very shortly. So I would say to anybody out there who's really struggling with it, it may well be that the Norfolk Chambers will be able to give you a hand at least to negotiate the always complex bits of bureaucracy that there is in these things. Let me just ask a wider question that I'm sure it will touch on a lot of different businesses. Coronavirus clearly has had a huge impact. We've already talked about working from home. Perhaps that's going to mean changing work patterns for the longer term. But there are lots of people who are now thinking potentially of actually changing their career direction. Perhaps they're realizing that the path they were on before, there are either not going to be the job opportunities that were there before, or perhaps when they've been furloughed or they've been locked down, they've discovered that they would really like to pursue a very different career. And I wonder what advice you could give. Rebecca, what would you say to someone who's wanting a new direction in their career, in their life, and would perhaps like to get some training?
There's tons of online opportunities for training, and James would probably be your man to talk to about training opportunities, obviously. But there's tons of online resources. So if you're interested in potentially looking at a new sector to get into, then that could be a really good place to start. And a lot of these courses are actually being offered for free as a result of coronavirus. There's lots of businesses out there at the moment that are really keen to be able to offer opportunities to people to be able to undertake training and obviously broaden out their skills base. The other thing that I would suggest is to try and just get some work experience. And that may mean sort of offering yourself out to do some sort of extracurricular activities, either at a lower cost or cost-free, just to try and gain some exposure. Because as a recruiter, from our perspective, if we have a candidate that has actually gained some physical experience and can get a reference, that does obviously help us to then quantify their capability when we're looking to place them into a role.
Okay, James, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the big thing for me is attitude, because the world of work is changing completely day by day. And you know, skills obviously are really important, but if you've got candidates that've got the right attitude, the key here now is flexibility. We've got to change our way of looking at things. We've got to change the way we actually, as an employer and as well as someone who's actually going for work. I think they've got to have the right mindset. With the right mindset, you know, you can achieve a lot. And then if you've got that, it's a case of actually being, you know, flexible. Don't box yourself in. I'm sure Rebecca would say transferable skills are very important, and people have got an open mindset to do things which they may have not done before.
Let me bring in a question from Michael Rooney, who works for Break, which is he's talking about the work it's doing as one of 7 participating Department of Education schemes around the country, which is improving the services for young people leaving care. What can we do working together to ensure that the most vulnerable, e.g. care experienced young people, are not forgotten and have training and employment opportunities? And he's just topped up that question, wanting to know what companies can do to make sure that those difficulties which some of the most disadvantaged in society are already facing, like those who have experience of care, what they can do. I mean, Karen, does your company take on people who perhaps have had experience in care?
I think what I can say, Karen, is we're trying to be much more diverse in our recruitment policies. So rather than going to the same university or same schools or demanding the same entry criteria, we're trying to be much more open and much more accepting of all sorts of different people who maybe haven't had the same socio-economic background advantage as others, and making sure that we're widening our recruitment and doing it in as engaging a way as possible. Aviva as a whole is involved in quite a number of different schemes, like Career Ready or Upreach, and I know in Norfolk we've been involved with the New Anglia LEP, which is looking at reaching out to schools and individuals, trying to get opportunities out there for people, particularly maybe STEM careers, which people maybe not thinking of previously. So absolutely, yes.
Let's just take another point. Norfolk has got some world-leading universities, of course, the UEA, the University in Ipswich, and so on. Several growing industry sectors that will significantly contribute to economic growth, such as life sciences, clean energy, digital, and IT. How do we recruit and retain talent in our county? I mean, I think it is hugely important, isn't it? I know Norfolk has made great strides to try to adapt to the changing demands of employment, and to look to the future, whether it's green energy projects, life sciences, technology, of course, the huge and wonderful park out near the UEA. Rebecca, are you finding that there are lots of enticing opportunities out there that can make sure that people do stay in Norfolk and bring their talents and help this sector to thrive?
I think what coronavirus has shown us, and I'm sure that most people will agree with this, is the opportunity for flexible working has greatly increased our capacity to be able to recruit and retain people. The flexibility side of things is a huge want and desire for people, sort of both locally and sort of further afield. So actually, the fact that we're now able to offer market-leading opportunities, but people don't necessarily have to be here to take them up, is a huge benefit.
James, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah. I think one of I think to answer the question you were saying about how do we retain people, I think young people certainly, when they're coming into workplace today, want more than just a job. They want a future. And I think where organisations just say, this is your job, this is what you're going to be doing, and just do it well, and we'll see you in 5 years, is gone. A young person, certainly intelligent, capable individual with the right skill sets and the right attitude coming into the workplace, is wanting something more than that. They want development. They want a path. They want to know what's next. And more importantly, as Rebecca will probably share, companies even now have got to, in a competitive world, have got to demonstrate to candidates that, you know, if you're going to come to work for us, this is what you've got to offer. And from it's got to have a career path. We do a lot of work down in Cambridge, and it's quite interesting. It's very competitive for staff down there, what organisations in comparison are doing to keep their staff, but more importantly, what they're looking to do is long-term. They're looking longer term for them, so they're showing them a pathway and they're developing them. So it's very, very common. It's part of the package. When you come to work for us, this is the journey you'll go on. This is the training you'll get. This is the development you'll get. And this is what we expect you to be. They want more than just a job.
I know that two of their panelists want to come in, but I want to squeeze in one more question because a lot of people are asking about the creative industries. Alice Whitney has said, Creative Nation are nearing completion of Arts Council England funded R&D focused on early career talent in the east of England. I'd welcome hearing from anyone who'd like to explore this area further and contribute to our thinking. We also have a short and sweet survey here if you're not already too survey fatigued, and there's a link there in the chat section. And Brian Bush has also come in on this, talking about how, as Norfolk has a rapidly developing digital and creative sector, can you advise whether you believe there's adequate opportunities to onboard young people in this space and develop them forward? Just who would like to answer that very quickly? Is that Karen? Have you got your hand up on that?
I can answer that. I mentioned earlier about the apprenticeship schemes that we have, and then quite a number of those are in that digital technology space. And so we absolutely see it as a hugely growing area for us. More and more people want to interact and buy their insurance digitally. And we need to make sure that we have that innovative new thinking, and that young people can provide inputting into our capability there. So absolutely. And some of those apprentices that will be joining us absolutely will be in that space.
Rebecca, do you want to just come in quickly on creative industries?
Norwich is an amazing hub for creative and digital sector. There are a growing number of organisations in this area, and there are also some industry and worldwide leading businesses who are winning awards that are great across the whole of the world, and Google-led awards, and all of those brands that we all hear of. So there's huge opportunity for those people that do want to transition into the sector. I think that it is extremely competitive. So anything that people can do to differentiate themselves if they'd like to make that transition does really help, be that obviously secure some apprenticeship or some experience within the sector. But yeah, it's a massive opportunity for people.
Yeah, if I can just say.
Thank you very much for that. Just do briefly, if you could, please, James, because we're almost out of time.
I know Brian's an ambassador in the digital sector, and he's doing a great job. And I do think that when the education needs to bridge closer to the digital industry to see what their real needs are, so they can actually prepare people for that industry. That would help.
Thank you very much for that. Let me just mention Catherine Richards has posted that at East Norfolk, we have investment to establish the new T-level qualifications in digital in Great Yarmouth. By September, we will have brand new labs, courses, and are preparing young people at the moment for digital and creative careers. And let's hope that by September, people might even be able to attend in person instead of having to do it all remotely. So Catherine, thank you for that. And a big thank you to all of our panelists on that. I know we didn't perhaps manage to get to every single question that was submitted, but hopefully we've covered quite a bit of ground. So an enormous thank you to James Howells, Karen Patterson, Rebecca Heedle, and a shame we didn't have Chloe Smith with us, but I think that you all did a wonderful job in contributing in her place. So thanks so much, and we'll move on to the next discussion in just a moment. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right, and we're going to move on to rebuilding the economy. So any of you who would like to get your questions into the Q&A function, please do so now. We are going to move straight on to the next section. The time is racing past, and time for a little bit of a debate so that you can, a little bit of a break so you can after this next debate. I hope you all, I think there were lots of interesting contributions there. I would have loved to have pushed Chloe as a member of the government on the Kickstart scheme. Clearly, I think there are some bureaucratic problems there, but it does seem as though the Norfolk Chambers of Commerce will be able to help you. So if we can get lined up ready for the next debate, which is going to be about rebuilding the economy. And I'll be back with that in just 1 minute. Right, we've got lots to get through this afternoon, so let's crack on. And if we can have the panel for the next debate, Stefan Gurney, Executive Director of Norwich Business Improvement District. Are you there, Stefan?
Yes, I am. Hello, Carol. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well, Stefan, and thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Clive Lewis, MP for Norwich South. Hello, Clive, are you there?
I am, Carol. Nice to speak to you again.
Excellent. Clive, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you with us. David Parfrey, Chief Executive for the Norwich Research Park. Hello, David, are you there?
Hello, Carol, I certainly am, yes.
Excellent. David, thank you very much and welcome. And James Wild is the MP for Northwest Norfolk. James, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Carol. Very nice to see you.
Great. We have everybody there. So thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. This debate building where you can all do the Q&A. I've got lots of kick off, but use the Q&A button. You can submit your questions as we go through this. Thank you all so much for joining us. I know it's a hectic time. Let's just start off. Obviously, it's been a very difficult time for many businesses. Some have had to be closed completely, others have had to adapt to very different ways of working. Let's just kick off by asking each of the panelists what you feel are going to be not just the biggest challenges, but ahead to the spring, and hopes ease up a bit with the continuation of the rollout. James, as I have you there full screen, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, thanks very much, Carol. I think the big challenge at the moment that businesses want is more certainty over the reopening plan. So the Prime Minister said the week beginning the 22nd of February, we're going to set out a similar plan to we did with the lifting of the first lockdown, which I think will be very important, so people can have timelines, hopefully, and a plan, and understand how and whether the tiering system is going to be taken forward and how we'll do that. And then I think it's really going to be about getting confidence back into people. I remember back when Eat Out to Help Out was being rolled out, I had friends who were still reluctant to go out to pubs and things. I think we need to get back into that habit, hopefully sooner rather than later, of actually being able to go out and do things. Obviously, the vaccine program, over 10 million people already jabbed, is giving people confidence to do that. So I'm optimistic then. We've got a year of recovery ahead of us, and I think there'll be strong economic growth as we lift the lockdown. It's been very difficult for so many people, but other people have also been able to build up savings during this period, which they haven't been able to really spend. So hopefully that will benefit. And then there's also a greater appreciation of local staycations, Norfolk produce, all of the great things about Norfolk that you know and everyone on this meeting knows. There's the opportunity to promote all those. So I think it's going to be tougher for a bit longer as we wait for the controls to be eased. But once that happens, I think I'm optimistic about the year ahead.
Clive Lewis, are you also optimistic? We had the Bank of England yesterday saying that thanks to a good rollout from the vaccine, they thought there was every chance of a good bounce back after the first quarter of this year.
I think it's one of the things about setting out timelines, dealing with a pandemic, that you can't you can't control. It's very difficult to model. We don't know how it mutates. It's very difficult to go down a path where you can make predictions. And I think making predictions at this point in time is I think, somewhat problematic. I think what you can do is you can look at broad principles. And the broad principles for me in terms of building back better and some of the bigger challenges. One, I think, is protecting incomes. Every business person listening to this will have their own cash flow issues, their own cash flow problems at the moment. We'll no doubt come on to that. But ultimately, you won't have a business unless if there's a sizable percentage of the population, of your consumers, of your customers, who don't have income to be able to spend in your businesses. So that's going to be a big problem. I think overall, though, what we can take from this is, I think for me, I will have far more confidence if once and for all we can form a political consensus amongst business and politicians that the state is not in competition with the private sector. What we have seen is that the state is a part, an integrated part of the economy, which I think we all understand, and that we work in cooperation with one another to be able to achieve certain goals. There are things that the private sector can do, and there are things that the state can do. And we need that state support now more than ever, given that we have this pandemic, a pandemic which in many ways, if you listen to some scientists, could be the new normal. I don't think we should put all our eggs in one basket. I think the vaccine is fantastic. The rollout, which has been done through the public sector and has been a success, an overwhelming success, is something to be applauded. I think we should remember that. But I think we also have to understand that there are vast swathes of the world who are not going to have access to these vaccines, perhaps until 2024. That's 3 years of mutations amongst the vast swathe of the world's global population. That's a problem. And that could mean that we are living with this for the considerable future. And that means that we have to adapt. And I think that's what the key word is here, how we adapt long-term into the future with this pandemic amongst us.
Thanks, Clive. Stefan, the private sector, do you see yourself working in partnership with government? And where do you see the opportunities in the coming months?
I think it's absolutely key that the private and political forums work together. Clive and I only on Friday were discussing one of the major issues that we see coming on the horizon for the city. I think there are a whole load of opportunities, but we are going to struggle in the short term. And one of the things that I think are really key are around charges for businesses. And I look specifically to the business rates. As an example, we have that on deferral until March. And then the business rates are going to be due. So we're calling on the central government to look at a further deferral for a year there. And if they don't, there are going to be a lot of businesses that come March and April are going to struggle to be able to meet the repayments. And I think that's just one of a short-term challenge, but there's a longer-term opportunity for us. This is the perfect opportunity to look at business rate reform. And the challenges that the city centres and most businesses are struggling between online and bricks and mortar, and the disproportionate level of taxation on those that are operational versus online. And I think that's one that the government needs to work with the private sector to solve. I think the other one that's secretly or sneakily coming up through through government is the permitted development rights and the deregulation of the Class E, which will mean that pretty much any city centre business, whether it's a pharmacy, whether it's a retail space, whether it's commercial, can be changed to housing without any planning consent. And that's a huge danger for a city centre and most towns that you could change, especially considering that at the moment most landlords or owners are not getting any support from the government. They're the one area that isn't, and therefore they're going to very quickly need to look at overheads and challenges in that. So for me, business rates and city centre redevelopment are huge challenges, but huge opportunities as well.
David Parfrey, just first of all on that, the wider point, the opportunities as well as the challenges coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with all the things that have been said, so I'm not going to repeat those. I perhaps like to come from a slightly different angle. I think in terms of the challenges, just very briefly first, for me, it's absolutely having clarity about what we do and what we can do first, and the connectivity about us not being little islands on our own, working together, new collaborations, new networks, new ways. And then the continuity, we need to build on what we have, but we need to go somewhere else, go forward. So, people talk about bouncing back to normal, bouncing back. No, we shouldn't. We've got to bounce forward to something that's new. Clive said we're going to be in this for the long term because of mutations. Now, I've worked in management of science for a very long time. It is in the nature of viruses that they mutate. We are going to be with this, but we have the most wonderful scientists in the world working in the UK. We have a long history of punching well above our weight, and we will continue to do so. Just incidentally, little pitch, 3,000 of those wonderful scientists are in Norwich, at that wonderful place down by the UEA, Carol. It's called the NRP, the Norwich Research Park.
Yeah.
Just one there. So if we take all of that and use that to build forward, then I think we need to focus on three things. And I call them 3 Ps: people, place, and product. We need to be really clear about what the people we have can do, what skills they need, and what they need from us as a community. We need to celebrate the place we've got. It's a wonderful place. Celebrate that place. Well, what can it do? So, for example, the tourism industry. And then we need to be really clear about
Okay,
what is
I'm going to ask you to wrap up. We've got a lot of other questions to get.
Product. That's it. That's me.
And your product is cutting edge science and technology.
It certainly is.
Marvellous. David, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but we've got lots of questions. And so I'd like to try and get through a few other points. Let me pick up, first of all, on a point that Stefan Gurney raised about the city centres. And Jonathan Cage submitted a question in advance saying he's concerned about the future of the city centre with the collapse of retail and home working. What is being done to revitalise the centre and to ensure that we do keep jobs and people in the area? And if I could just say, as we go through this debate, if you want to come in at any stage, any of the panelists, just raise your hand. You can either do it visually or you can do it on the little raise your hand icon on the bottom of the screen. Clive, do you want to come in on this? The future of the city centre of Norwich. Hello, Clive.
I was on those famous words. I was still muted, so I do apologise. I think Stefan's picked up on something, and it's quite clear that simply deregulating inside the city centre who can turn what properties into offices or into residential accommodation isn't the way forward. It's going to cause more problems than creating solutions. And I think that's something which is rightly now coming to the attention of politicians and the public alike. I think if we want to see people coming into our city centres again, first of all, they have to have confidence that it's safe. That's the first thing. Secondly, they have to have money in their pockets. They're not going to come back into the city centre unless they feel that's the case. And thirdly, there has to be a creative ambience in that city centre. So there has to be, we have to ensure that the heart of those city centres is somewhere where people want to come, they want to spend money, they want to be. And if that's all going to be turned into residential areas, then that's not necessarily the case. So we've got to make sure that the ecosystem of our city centres remains diverse enough to be able to attract all the different types of people we want to come there. And I think those are the key things for me. But I mean, I'll keep coming back to this. If we are now suddenly going to say, look, we've spent hundreds of billions of pounds on this pandemic, the money's run out, which it hasn't. But if we're going to say that, and we now need to start clawing it back and creating balanced budgets, that's going to leave an awful lot of people in a hole. A lot of the businesses that I'm seeing at the moment, they want stability, they want to reopen. They also want a long-term plan to be able to see how they're going to get themselves out of this hole. This isn't your usual standard economic downturn where those who are not as efficient, who don't have a product that people want, can just go by the wayside. This is something which has been a global pandemic. We have never seen anything like this before. So it means that we need a new level of support, one that we haven't seen in this country for a long time. And I think that would also help our city centres.
Stefan, as you raise this concern about Norwich city centre, do you Would you like to comment on that question which Jonathan submitted?
I think the bid are probably one of the best positioned as they are with my peers across most of the cities in the UK. Hence, we're working locally, regionally and nationally to lead on the process of ensuring that the city centres are at the forefront of the thought processes from central government. There are lots of different elements that we've been working with, from the local authorities and the 2040 vision from the City Council to be able to build back through to working with the business community in each of the different areas, whether it's hospitality and leisure and how we look at supporting the evening and nighttime economy. We're looking at the infrastructure. I mean, we've worked with the county and the city to pull in funding for the transforming cities, which is about 60 million. The towns deals that we've just secured, which is another 25 million in investment, and that's looking at digital transformation, is looking at the regeneration of the east of the city. So there are those long-term goals, but there are also the bits of making sure that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. And this is challenging central government, that they don't do things like deregulation, and they don't give a ridiculous bias towards online sales that therefore have such a negative impact on the city centres. We're going to see Debenhams and Topshops right in the middle of the city centre. Both of those have been bought out without the store function of it. So they're all going to go online, and they're going to continue multi-million pounds worth of sales, but they're not contributing. And we're also not seeing them contribute in the same way with the organisations like Amazon, who are not being challenged at an international level, let alone the UK level, to pay their fair way to support our cities.
An anonymous attendee is the name that's come up, says, do you think that artistic and creative inputs from arts organisations could work together with the city centres to increase the number of people, so bring more economy to the shops? And the Norfolk Chambers is going to answer this question online. So we've got lots of other questions coming in. Let's just move on to one of the other questions that's been submitted on the Q&A from Peter Bussey, who says, it seems that much of the government support is aimed at larger organisations. What assistance is there for the grassroots small independents that we have in Norfolk? And hopefully they'll still be around after COVID improves. James, do you want to answer that one? What help is there for the smaller independent businesses? And I mean, are you concerned that many of them who have perhaps been without income for many months now are simply not going to survive?
Yeah, well, as Clive referred to, there's been hundreds of over £200 billion worth of support across the economy for businesses and individuals, and the grants that have been available for leisure, retail, tourism businesses have obviously benefited small companies as well, which is very important, as well as the bounce back loans and other schemes and support that's there, as well as business rates, the VAT cut. The list is pretty much endless, and it's important that we continue to maintain that support while we have restrictions in place. So I've called for the continuation of business rates and the VAT cut through to the end of this year to support the crucial hospitality sector for our country, because we're in a position where this wasn't like the financial crash where massive debt was built up and the economy crashed. We've effectively paused our economy. So we now need to unpause it and support people through the pause and as we reopen again. So there is support there for small businesses, and that's absolutely right that there should be. Just in terms of touching on the city centre, towns centre issue, I think it's right that there shouldn't be the ability to convert things that aren't suitable for living. But we do need to, thinking about Kings Lynn, particularly there's excess retail units as there are in other town centres, and we need to convert some of those and have more city centre living to make them more viable places. So it's about having a balance here. So it shouldn't be a kind of free-for-all, but equally we don't want to have a bureaucratic planning system that stops people changing and adapting to what people are actually demanding.
So you think it would be quite a good idea if some of the shops, if they're going to be vacant, maybe they could be turned into housing, which is another big demand in Norfolk?
Yeah, that's what we're looking to do in Kings Lynn as part of the Towns Fund bid, the money that government's made available to 100 towns across the country, including Norwich and Great Yarmouth and Kings Lynn. We've put our bid in. Norwich have already had theirs confirmed, so that's funding all to help level up and to make these places more sustainable. So it's about having a destination where people want to go to. The mixture of the creative and the cultural, as well as the retail, purely retail offering, is the way that they can sustain. And we also need to look at the taxation and how Amazon and others are taxed compared to the bricks and mortar.
David Parfrey, I wonder if I could just get a point from you. I mean, the Norwich Research Park, wonderful place that it is. What do you do as an alternative centre? I mean, is there a danger that a wonderful new high-tech centre like yours actually makes life even harder for the traditional heart of the city?
No, I don't think so at all. So the first thing, we've been around for 20 years. So, you know, we're not new. And I spend a huge amount of my time every week talking to local businesses and trying to ensure we are part of the region, part of the community. So we are not something that's a little island. Just because we do science, it doesn't make us a little island. We are part integrated with the region, and we always will be. We have 3,000 scientists, yes, but for every one of scientists, we have 4 other people doing other careers. That's a huge amount of consumers for local products. And as business users, we have a huge demand for local products. No, I don't see us competing at all. I see us absolutely supporting.
Okay, David, thank you for that. Let me bring in a question from Rob Davis. An interesting point this. What can the government do to maximise the potential we have in Norfolk and the wider East of England region so that it can compete on an even footing with the Northern powerhouse, etc., especially in sectors like science, energy, tech and creative? And having worked in the political world for a lot, it has been fascinating how the Northern Powerhouse Initiative, some of the more directly elected mayors have really managed to make their voices heard and to put forward the case for the particular parts of the country that they are representing. Clive, do you think that there is more that Norfolk and perhaps the wider East of England region could be doing to make sure that its voices and its priorities are heard and noticed and heeded?
I think in the
Clive,
short term.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Carol?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Thank you. I think in the short term, giving more responsibility to local authorities to be able to help build back. They understand the local community. I think that would be a good starting point. I think longer term, we can look at a bigger system, a bigger change in terms of more devolution, but it needs to be transparent, it needs to be democratic, and it needs to include local people in having a say in that, rather than just a handful of councillors and others sitting in a room with government deciding how we carve up the different local authorities. Let's involve people. Let's have the citizens of Norfolk involved in this and how we make the decisions. I also think as well, if we're going to look at how we begin to crowd in investment into this part of the region, then I think we should seriously look at regional investment banks. One of the things that's come out of this pandemic is the inability of small and medium-sized businesses to access finance. I was inundated with businesses, some of them hugely successful, who weren't able to access the resources that were coming from the government and via the banks. And I think longer term, we know that credit, we know that investment in this area is difficult. And I think if you look at what's happened in Germany and some other countries, the way that they have a devolved banking system, a regional banking system, where those banks understand the inherent issues here locally, rather than being 200 miles away, I think that would make a massive difference. And that needs state support. And I think if we did that, then we could begin to compete with the powerhouses in other parts of the country. So devolution and regional investment through regional investment banks, I think would be a good start.
Just very quickly, you talk about devolution. What about a directly elected mayor?
I don't think that's necessarily. Yeah, I just don't think that's necessarily the answer. It could be an answer for some parts of the country. It may be. I think if we ask people, if we have citizens' assemblies to start looking at how we want in the 21st century to take back control away from Westminster, we've seen so many bottlenecks in our ability to respond. I sit in with James on the weekly meetings, or did it during the pandemic, with the county council and other local authorities, listening to, well, we can't tell you about this. We're waiting for the government to tell us what's going to happen. And that held things up. So let us here locally give us more power, more resource, to be able to do these things, to be able to make the changes we need to take ourselves into the 21st century in a way that's right for Norfolk and Norwich.
Okay, Alex Durant has come up on the Q&A and he says he completely agrees with Clive. Limited access to finance is a huge obstacle for many small and medium-sized businesses. Stefan, your thoughts on this?
Thank you. I was interested in the comments around, obviously, Norwich and Norfolk have quite established setups. Quite recently, I've been looking a lot at how we engage with central government, and specifically around the East. We've had several of the large corporations come out with forecasts and looking at how the economy will be affected and how we bounce back. I look at it like PwC and KPMG reports, and it always amazes me how many of them actually miss off the East. One of them included the East in with the Southeast, which I raised and they're addressing. But that's a huge concern to me. And recently we've looked at setting up the Eastern Bids Group, and we struggled to define realistically what most people understood as the East. Now, if we're not sure of what the East is, and we're in it and it's heartland, then I'm not sure how we can ask central government to devolve responsibility or authority to that. I would like to see a very clear message, and it's a shame the alliteration of the engine has gone, because an Eastern engine would be very much a useful alliteration to use. But in the old EDA days, we had Bedfordshire, we had Hertfordshire in it. Now, do we go as far as Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridgeshire, Essex? But then we almost go into the M25. So it's about us having a very clear definition. I think the East is proven time and again to be one of the largest GVA contributors to the central government, and we should be seeing the investment, the infrastructure, the growth to support that, not being just seen as a cash cow and a supporter that they can just draw funding out without actually having to do anything with. And Norwich, as our regional city, needs to be at the forefront of that.
Great, thanks very much, Stefan. Sorry, we're running out of time. We're cutting into the tea break, but I want to get just some quick comments on this from David and from James. David, what would you like to see? A bit more clout for this hugely important region.
Yeah, so if I turn that around slightly to say I spent a long time working in London and down in Swindon, where a lot of research comes from, investment comes from. And a lot of the conversation was, yes, we know there's great stuff, but it's all the way up there. It's almost as though there's a belief in centre that the world stops at Cambridge, and we've got to dispel that myth. One of the things we need to do is to get a bit more proud and get a bit more, on the front foot about just how good we are, and start dispelling that myth. I think there's a sense that we've become a bit believing that the world stops at Cambridge. It doesn't. So for me, if I'm honest, and I'm really honest here, is do we need to have a fancy old name like the Golden Triangle, the Northern Powerhouse, just to be excellent? We are excellent. And, I would like to see a little bit more down in London listening to that and looking for it and believing it.
Thank you, David. James, do you think there is a danger that Norfolk, the east of England, it simply hasn't got the right structures to make sure that it kind of punches up to and maybe above its weight?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's so much about the structures. I think we need to shout about what we're doing a bit more. I think, we certainly doesn't end at Cambridge, certainly goes up to King's Lynn, goes to Norwich. The question was around science and energy and us lifting up to the Northern Powerhouse. Well, I think they're trying to catch up with where we are. We've got a really strong science base in Norwich and around, and offshore wind energy and other developments in the sector. We're kind of at the forefront of that. So I think we MPs, local government leaders, we all need to work together to make our case, get our voice heard. My colleague George Freeman, who's now chairing a task force looking at how we can lift some of the restrictions now left the EU to support these dynamic growth sectors that we're on, talks about when we're having meetings with the chancellors, you give us the infrastructure and we'll give you the growth. And I think it's pretty much as simple as that. We've been left behind in terms of road and rail and other connectivity and broadband, and that's where my focus as an MP is about improving that, because then you give those tools to businesses and the entrepreneurs that we've got around the region, and they will then get on and deliver the growth and deliver the prosperity and high value jobs. So I don't think it's so much around structures. You could spend an inordinate amount of time coming up with a new model for local government, which may in the end deliver some savings or some improvements, but I think we should try and work with what we've got at the moment, but work together. Also bringing in the LEP has obviously got a role to play here as well.
You don't think a directly elected mayor would help you to make sure that your voice was heard a bit better?
I'm not massively attracted to that. I'm not sure that it would actually deliver the benefit that you're saying. I think actually having a broader representation is a better way to go.
Okay, James, thank you for that. Let me just mention a few interesting comments that have come up on the chat during that. Brian Bush, to all the panelists and attendees, said great stuff from David on this issue. Alongside our voice, we have the willingness of a UK government to start listening properly. John Fick making the point that dueling the A47 would help the East to be recognised. As James has said there, a lot of those connections really need to be improved. Rob Davis said, well said, David, recognition of what we have already achieved and will achieve will convince those of the influence of our value, which is huge. And Wayne Stannett has added in, completing the NDR to allow for better access into Northern Norwich and open up North Norfolk businesses would also help. I think I'm losing the end of that message there, but I think we get the point. Lots of interesting stuff. I'm sorry I didn't get to a lot of the questions that have been submitted and pre-submitted, but I hope that we've covered a lot of the ground which many of you wanted to hear from our panelists. So a huge thank you to Stefan Gurney, to Clive Lewis, to David Parfrey, and to James Wild. We could all do a little virtual round of applause. If you can't find the button, I'll just do that. Thank you all so much. We're going to take a break now. My schedule, oh yeah, great. I've just got a message from Kayleen saying that the break is going to continue until 3:25. So you've got 10 minutes now to grab a quick cup of tea and a biscuit or three. And you can also start submitting any questions you have for our next panel, which is on climate change and going green. So if you just pop your questions into the Q&A, and I'll be back with everyone else at 3:25 for the next debate. Many thanks to all of you. Hopefully that's a bit better. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. I hope that I have unmuted myself. I hope that everyone has managed to grab a quick cup of tea, hot chocolate, and so on. And we are now going to continue and move on to our third debate this afternoon, which is on climate change and going green. Just a reminder that we've got the Q&A function. Do pop your questions into there as we go along, and I'll try to bring them in. We've also, of course, got the chat function if you'd like to make a comment on what is happening or what anybody has said. So let me just see if we have our next panel. Duncan Baker, MP for North Norfolk. Hello, Duncan, are you there?
Hi, Carol, I'm here.
Yeah, hello, Duncan. Good to have you with us. Thank you very much. Richard Buckingham, Climate Change and Carbon Manager for Anglian Water. Richard, hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello, I'm sorry about this. These are actually nonsense calls from Cuba that seem to keep coming through. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Jonathan Denby, Head of Corporate Affairs at Greater Anglia. Hello, Jonathan.
Good afternoon, Carol. Good to see you.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. And Dr. Catherine Ellis-Jones, who is Stakeholder Engagement Manager at Offshore Wind for Vattenfall. Hello, Dr.
Hello,
Catherine, are you there?
I am. Hi. Hello.
Hi, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Climate change is going to be a huge issue. Oh, I think I might have just lost my connection. Are you hearing me, everyone?
Yes,
We can hear
Yes.
you.
Right, I've lost my screen. I don't know if you can still see me. Gosh, that's a bit strange. I've
we can see and hear you, Carol.
Perfect. In that case, I will just carry on and see. I'll see if I can rectify that when we get into the first discussion. Climate change is going to be a huge issue, clearly in the coming year, with the big COP summit coming up in the autumn. We've got a new American president who's very keen on the green agenda. Everyone knows now that climate change is a reality and that everyone has to play their part. What would be your top tips for any business, particularly, of course, the local businesses there in Norfolk, wanting to take the first steps to reducing their carbon footprint and becoming more sustainable? Perhaps I could ask you, first of all, Jonathan Denby from Greater Anglia. I'm just going to try and sort this out because I can't see all of you. So if I disappear momentarily, don't worry about it.
That's fine, Carol. Yes, I think the key things I would flag for any business starting down this route. Firstly, I think it's important to have that real commitment as you kick off. So be clear that you are really going to take this seriously and approach it with that mindset. I think that makes a big difference. I think there's always a quick start you can make with sort of easy wins in any business. So what you can do with recycling or energy saving that are quite easy to do, but will make a big difference and it will all add up over time. I think there's a lot of best practice out there, so it's well worth looking out for that because lots of businesses are already going down these routes, so you don't have to be on your own. And I think you can seek advice if needed from organisations like the Carbon Trust. And I guess the final point I'd make as a sort of a starting point is to build things into your decision making. So if you see that as something that's crucial in the way that you make all your business decisions, then that makes things a lot easier. So for example, if you think of the new trains that we've got, all of that drove the type of new trains we have, the features that they have, even the bi-mode trains, even with their diesel power packs, those diesel power packs, if need be, if we go to an all electrified network, can just be uncoupled and taken out without having to completely remodel the whole train. Or you could convert them to battery power or hydrogen power if other technologies come along. So it's that kind of decision making and thinking ahead that I think will make the difference.
Richard Buckingham, Climate Change and Carbon Manager for Anglian Water. Perhaps you could start by just explaining what you're doing at Anglian Water to try to make your whole business greener.
Okay, well, along with the rest of the water industry in England, Wales and Scotland are a little bit different. We've committed to achieving a net zero carbon position by 2030. So this involves reducing the amount of electricity we consume. It involves generating considerable amounts of renewable energy, therefore carbon free, and it involves reducing the amount of carbon that's kind of bound up in the materials that we use and the assets that we construct, that kind of thing. So we have a target of 44% renewables by 2025, and as I mentioned, the zero carbon by 2030. So it's quite a big commitment, and there are a number of organisations that are also committing to net zero by 2030. And just following on just from the previous point about what can businesses do, I think the key thing is undertake a baseline, understand what your carbon footprint is now, then set some targets for reduction and then go for it. And I would say the harder you set those targets, almost paradoxically, the better chance you've got of success. Really focused, and it can be done.
Dr. Catherine Ellis-Jones from Offshore Wind for Vattenfall. For people who aren't familiar with the Vattenfall project, perhaps you'd just like to tell us what you're doing and what your ambitions are. And I'm very glad to see that Richard was having a sip of his tea, so I'll also do likewise. Catherine.
Yes. Well, first of all, I thank you very much for inviting me, because, you know, I realize I'm sharing a platform with all these really established Norfolk companies and Norfolk organizations. And we are, I suppose, representing this afternoon the sector that is having a big impact in the region, actually, and partly, we hope, enabling and powering the UK's transition to a lower carbon economy altogether. So yeah, I work for a Swedish state-owned energy company called Vattenfall. It's been around for 100 years. So you can imagine that's quite a leviathan of a beast to turn around. But, you know, for the last few years, enabling everybody to live climate smarter lives has become our business strategy, not our sustainability strategy, but that's it. That's our business strategy. And so we are about expanding low carbon energy supplies. And the projects that I'm super pleased to be working on at the moment are two of the world's largest offshore wind farms just off Norfolk, well, quite a long way off Norfolk. You're not going to see them when they're installed. And they'll be providing first low carbon power from about 2026. And yeah, one thing that I'd like to pick up on things that people have said already, including from the previous talks, actually, I think James Howell from Turning Factor mentioned that young people are looking for a future in their jobs and in everything they do. And I think one thing that businesses can really benefit from taking these big decisions to green their businesses is that they will end up with a really motivated workforce as well, because people want to change the future. People are worried about climate change. In fact, a lot of studies show that that is the thing that worries young people most in particular. And so if you're a company that's taken that decision to make these important changes, then you're going to maintain a workforce, you're going to attract a brilliant workforce, and you'll have, you know, a really motivated workforce. And yeah, picking up on other things that people have said, you know, you have a great starting point in Norfolk with specialists at the UEA and other places who are world renowned in this field as well. And there's a huge effort of transition from more traditional industries, including energy industries, to work in renewables and work with renewables. I think there's a lot of great opportunities to partner up with greener companies than perhaps your own is now as well. That could be a good practical step.
Thanks very much for that. Duncan Baker, MP for North Norfolk. Do you think, I mean, a lot of businesses are clearly very aware of the whole climate change agenda, the need to try to reduce their carbon footprint and so on. But what would you advise companies, particularly in your patch of North Norfolk? I mean, I'm aware that, for example, it is a part of the world where people are very dependent on their cars and their vans and so on.
Yes, well, I think that this is the thing that actually there is so much that businesses can do. You don't have to be the brew dog that wants to go and plant 1 million trees by 2026 or be an insurance company that says I'm going to hit net zero in the next few years. It's all about, to me, steady, small, incremental steps. And I come from a business environment. Only sort of 13 months ago, I was working in business in North Norfolk. And it's very actually easy these days for businesses to now start to make those transitions. You know, you can go from anything as small as putting in energy efficient light bulbs to going all the way into putting vast solar panels all over your roof. But I think it's about that decision-making process. So if you're making that decision to invest in the next vehicle, think about an electric vehicle. Within your workplace, you can think about reducing waste, reducing plastic. You can think about planting trees to capture carbon. and installing smart meters, even the most simple ideas, such as switching to renewable energy suppliers, Carol. So I think there's huge amounts that businesses can do, no matter where they are, whether in North Norfolk or around the country. They often get hung up on thinking that they have to make enormous radical changes, but actually that's just not the case. They can actually start very small. But I think it's important to go back to what I think it was Jonathan said. Make that commitment, look at the strategy, make sure you have long-term and also short-term goals, and just start jumping on, because actually you can make those changes, and people really are.
I've got lots of comments coming in on this. Let me just mention a couple of them and just put this one to you, Duncan, while I have you here. Alex Durant has said, good valid comments made, but it all seems to be down to individual businesses choosing to find ways to improve, whereas surely there needs to be a wider, integrated regional strategy. And a sort of similar, slightly different point, which perhaps you could just take both of these questions, Duncan. Alice Whitney says, can the region not take a bold stance and call it a climate emergency, which is what it is? Targets are fantastic, but that ought not to set the standard. Everyone should aim to exceed them, and sooner. An integrated strategy, and would it help to get there if it was a climate emergency?
Yeah, I think that's quite a good point. So what I would say on there is I think really you've almost got three strands to look at. I think you have to have, now whether that's locally or even nationally, government can either be an enabler, that by having they can have legislation to make things mandatory, or they can offer things through incentives. And we've seen in every single strand there, whether it's legislative through mandatory changes and the environment bill, whether it's incentivized where they feed in tariffs, green home grants, that sort of thing, or just pure enablers helping to move things in the right direction, that actually you've then had the consumer, people, businesses, all moving in the right direction. And underpinning all of this, Carol, is that at the end of the day, we have been the fastest country in the G20 to decarbonize. We have cut emissions by more than 40% since 1990 and been the fastest in the G7. So I actually think that we are doing it, we are moving in the right direction. We perhaps shouldn't beat ourselves up quite so much, and that actually we will also accelerate that trend as we start to shift over to more renewable technologies. We can obviously...
I'm gonna just, because we've got lots of questions to get through, and I should have said at the beginning of the debate, any of the panelists who'd like to come in at any point, just raise your hand, either digitally or physically, and I'll try and bring you in. But Jonathan, would you like to just come in on that point of whether we need a more of an overarching strategy and perhaps even calling it a climate emergency, just to give the whole process a real kickstart?
I think having an overarching strategy does help. I think Duncan's right that it is a mix of the mandatory and the incentives. So, for example, within our sector, within railways, there are some mandatory requirements and there are also some incentives, and between them, those are making a big difference. All the trains now have regenerative braking. They actually put the electric trains, that is, they put electricity back into the grid, which is very, very effective. We also have sort of lots of targets that we are required to do around stations and making those more energy efficient, and that's helping make a real difference. And then there's lots of things we're doing because there's incentive to do them. And indeed, I think the point that other speakers have made about the fact that employees, and indeed not just actually young employees, other employees as well, do feel very passionately about this. So actually, I think in organisation, I agree, it's not everywhere, and that's why I think you need some mandatory things and some very specific incentives. But I think in lots of organisations, there are lots of people within them driving these things to happen. So I think that does help. Clearly, we need to keep on doing that, and equally for us, working with other transport providers and making the whole system for rail as integrated as possible, because obviously people's journeys are from homes, of course, right through to their destination. It's not just the train bit that we provide in the middle. So we are also trying to improve that and collaborate even more effectively, whether it be bus operators or others, or equally put in place more cycling spaces at stations, things like that, because all of our stations now have some. So, but I think it's a mix of incentive and mandatory regulations. I think it is both. I don't think it can be just one or the other.
I'd just like to flag up a couple of points that have been made on the chat. Ned Harrison has pointed out that for anyone wanting to take Richard's advice, and I think that was about setting targets and goals, we have a free carbon calculator and other free environmental resources for business, and the address is there, carboncharter.org/footprint. You can see that in your chat. Charlie Gavain has also pointed out that it's worth mentioning the new greenhouses being built in the region, which are heated with heat pumps powered by treated sewage water, a world first. We've been filming them for the past year, and 10% of all UK tomatoes are to be grown here in Norwich. Great point. Let me just get a comment from Richard on that one. Presumably you're providing the treated sewage water for growing the tomatoes. I'm not sure. I wanted to know that.
Well, it's the heat from the effluent that we're actually supplying. So it's on a kind of a loop, if you like, almost like a central heating system in your house. It is circulated to the greenhouse. So the advantage to Anglian Water and the broader context is that we're providing heat that heats the greenhouses, and in fact through heat exchange it cools the greenhouses in the summer, which is another key thing. But the water that then returns from the greenhouse is cooler than it was at the beginning, which means that the water that then goes back into the watercourse is cooler, which is all round better for the environment. So it's a really nice kind of synergistic relationship there, where there's carbon benefits from the greenhouses and there's environmental benefits from the treated effluent. And the other thing to say is that if I could, I'll try and address this delicately, but the heat from that treated sewage is always going to be there. So there are a whole host of water treatment works all around Britain that are producing heat, that they're going to continue to produce heat forever.
It's almost like renewable energy, isn't it, Richard?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's wonderful. We've got about, we're going to extend, and we've got about another, I think, 10 to 15 minutes left on this. Let me take a couple of the questions that that were pre-submitted. Mike Fields is asking about housing. How do you think we can improve housing stock energy efficiency in the UK? We continue to drive massive improvements in energy efficiency in new housing, but what about encouraging retrofit improvement? Dr. Catherine Ellis, I mean, what are your expectations about what your project could provide in terms of domestic energy?
Well, we will be providing the equivalent of 10% of the UK's domestic energy requirement from these projects. I think one of the key things is that, just like Richard mentioned, heat, we also need, as well as electrifying our energy systems, we are also going to need to electrify more of the energy demands that we're having. So, more electric heat pumps, electrifying transport and that kind of thing. So in the UK, Vattenfall also have a heat branch where we do things like district heating. And those are the sorts of opportunities that you can do with new housing, of course. But I mean, retrofitting all of the UK's housing is going to be a bit more of a challenge. But, things like the incentives that the government is bringing on, the 10-point plan, as well as kind of legal standards, those are going to drive the right actions. We are going in the right direction, and they're really successful. So just as an example, the government and successive governments have been supporting offshore wind for a few years, and that's been hugely successful. The UK is now #1 in the world in offshore wind, and the price has come down by 300%. So the right kind of incentive absolutely works, and so I think we should be really encouraged by our actions. And so probably we need some incentives for retrofitting old houses as well.
Well, yeah, I'm going to ask Duncan Baker about that, retrofitting old houses. And I'd just like you also perhaps to take on a question from Alistair Wilcock, who's come up on the Q&A and said, the tariffs on electricity
need to be moved to gas and other fossil fuels to reduce the disincentive to electrify domestic and commercial heat. This requires policy change and legislation from the government. Can Duncan Baker comment? So, Duncan, I wonder whether you can take on. I mean, there's two quite big questions there, but I mean, first of all, the original one on retrofitting older properties.
Yeah, well, I'm very glad that the question's been asked, because it's my sort of specialist area, really. And I think, I mean, first of all, I sit on the Environmental Audit Select Committee in Parliament, and one of the reasons to do that is because the build environment, which is effectively what we're talking about here, is incredibly important to our carbon emissions. It's one of the leading areas, which I don't think actually the government have done enough on to actually try and push down and reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we have. Now, you can then split it into two areas. Now, you can go down the view where we have to retrofit properties. We've introduced schemes such as the Green Homes Grant to try and help do that, incentivizing people to effectively make their homes greener, keep more energy efficiency in there. But I think the big thing we're missing out on, Carol, which is so linked to this, is our build materials. Concrete and steel and cement is incredibly bad for the environment and its production. Why are we not exploring more sustainable materials? Engineered wood, for instance, that is used in Europe so abundantly, which locks up carbon in effectively the wood. It's stronger than steel, and it's an area that largely we haven't really got into. So it's an area which I'm bringing through as an inquiry to the Environmental Audit Select Committee and want to see more done on it. In terms of the gentleman that asked about tariffs and yes, having to spread that across, that's an interesting area. It's not something that I've come across as a policy area yet, and certainly would want to take that back.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let me ask you, or we've got so many questions to go through here. We have got we've got a question here, which is about how the COVID pandemic has highlighted the truly global nature of our supply chains, which in turn shows the size of some product carbon footprints. What do you think needs to happen to shorten our supply chains and make them more local? I'm sorry, I should say. Jonathan, what, if any, efforts do you go to try to source your products locally, thus obviously boosting local businesses at the same time as reducing the carbon footprint and ensuring that there are fewer air miles involved?
And I suppose in a number of ways we try to do that. Clearly, we try to recruit locally and employ people locally. Where we have products that we can source for maintenance of trains. So our two main maintenance depots, one is here in Norwich at Crown Point, another one is down close to London, Ilford. Wherever possible, we try and then get the supplies for those where they can be supplied from within the region. And if they can't be supplied from in the region, from within the UK. And again, that's just sort of good sense really in terms of cost and logistics to get them there. Equally, it makes sense for us when we're in normal circumstances and we're not in a pandemic and we've got the cafe bars on the trains. So again, the food and the drink that we sell on the trains, wherever possible, we get that supplied locally, again, from in Norwich, because actually that just makes sense. It's easy, it gets it straight down to the station and onto the train. So wherever we can, we do try and get things supplied to us that are local or as short as possible. It's not absolutely possible on everything, but where we can, we do that.
Richard, I'm just going to bring in an extra point that was made here. Also worth noting that the relationship, this is from Brian E. Tuthill, worth noting the relationship between water efficiency and carbon reduction. On average, 17% of home energy use is heating water. I wonder whether you'd like to take on that point, and as we're running out of time, there's so many points to cover, you could also just talk about what Anglia Water's doing to try to promote local supply chains.
Okay, well, first of all, the water point, first of all, I think just building on what Duncan and Katrin said about the most difficult part of decarbonising the domestic sector is decarbonising heat, whether it be the heat in your central heating or the heat that you require to heat hot water. Those are the two most difficult things, and we may see in due course kind of hydrogen replacing gas in the kind of the gas network, or we might see electricity coming to form that thing. But that's the single biggest difficult thing, I think, to crack with regard to kind of buildings. And then with regard to the kind of the local supply chains and kind of the, if you like, the embodied or the capital carbon associated with the materials that we use, we've got a very comprehensive kind of carbon database of the carbon footprints, if you like, of all the materials we use from kind of factory, if you like, from to when we get them. Now, we then do a kind of a baselining of our design, and then our design iterates, and we try and reduce the amount of carbon involved in that design as we go through. The problem is for things like steel, which you may need for water mains, local suppliers of those kind of materials are non-existent. So that kind of presents challenges. But that's just not us. There are many places that don't have local steelworks, for example.
Okay, Dr. Katrin Ellis, obviously you're working for an organisation that works across several different countries, but do you, for example, you've got this project off the Norfolk coast. Are you trying to get your resources locally wherever possible?
Yeah, I was smiling wryly as this topic came up, because I'm just sort of working on some of our supply chain planning now, and really looking at where we can engage with local companies. So for the last couple of years, we have had meetings with lots of local companies, and also working with the Chamber and Norfolk County Council, the LEP and others. And so this is very much on our mind. And earlier on, I was asking one of my sustainability colleagues about this very topic. And I was saying, well, what's the big success factor for us in offshore wind? And it's undoubtedly the sort of balance of plant kind of part of things, where you can really focus on localizing your supply chain, get a lot of your materials locally. This is for sort of the construction side, the cabling and that sort of thing. And of course, longer term, it's all the operations and maintenance and the services and facilities and port facilities and infrastructure that go with that. So it's very much on our mind at the moment, and has been for a couple of years. And we hope that a lot of the early conversations that we'll have will start paying off soon as we put out our invitations to tender and things. So come on, Norfolk.
Duncan, what do you think there are sufficient incentives for companies to try to get their resources as locally as possible to not only reduce the carbon footprint by doing so, but of course also by supporting all of those wonderful local businesses?
Yeah, I don't think there are, Carol, actually. I think it's interesting because at the moment, it very much seems to be dependent on the ethical sourcing of the company in question. So, what we're seeing is businesses are looking at more sustainable producers. That's an easy win for them to then make that decision choice over how to look at their supply chain and decarbonize it. People will look at locally sourced goods. And I think we've seen that over the pandemic more than we've probably ever seen before. But in terms of the policy way of dealing with this, I think we have to look seriously at carbon border adjustments. So where you can see that certain industries are getting a competitive advantage, it may be that they're importing goods from countries where the cost of producing is extremely low. And if it's extremely low, they may be having a fairly flippant attitude towards carbon emissions. Having a policy such as a carbon border adjustment to try and level that unsustainable and uncompetitive and almost unfair advantage, I think would be a very good way of improving our supply chains.
I'm going to ask you one more quick question while I've got you there, Duncan, which Alice Whitney is very keen for you to answer. Why then, if the government's got such a green agenda, is it going ahead with opening a new coal mine? How can the government justify this? Alice asks very briefly, because we are out of time.
Because, Alice, we still have to produce steel. And essentially, you either import it or you do it yourself with the jobs. And in that specific case, There is a very, very specific reason that they've kept it, because the coke is there and it will provide employment. And at the moment, we still have to produce steel.
Okay, Duncan Baker,
Someone
thank you
has got
very
to do
much.
it. So I do understand the issue, but it's for a very specific reason.
That was wonderfully concise and to the point. Duncan Baker, MP, thank you very much indeed. And a huge thank you to Richard Buckingham, to Jonathan Denby, and to Dr. Catherine Ellis-Jones. I may not have got to every single question, but I think we've covered a lot of very interesting territory. And thank you all very much. Perhaps you'd all like to do a little online round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And we're going to move pretty much straight on to the next debate. So without any further ado, apart from me having a quick sip of water, we're going to move on, because we are a little bit behind schedule, into the discussion about Beyond Brexit. Quickly going to try and adjust the lighting in here so that hopefully you can see me a little better. A fascinating discussion. We're now going to move on to talking about Beyond Brexit. We've got our final panel for the afternoon. Richard Pace, Managing Director for Norwich Airport. Hello, Richard.
Good afternoon, and hello to everybody else on the panel and listening in.
Richard, thanks so much for joining us. Tracy Renshaw, Managing Director for Import Export Support. Tracy, hello.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Kevin Walsh, UK Sales Director for LV Shipping. Hello, Kevin.
Good afternoon, Carol. Hello, everybody.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us. And Leszek Wysotsky is the International Trade Advisor for the Department of International Trade. Leszek, thank you very much for joining us. Hello.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
I hope I've got that right. Leszek, is that right?
It was fantastic, Carol. It was very impressive.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, just as before, you can put a question into the Q&A box. You could also add in your points on the chat. And as we're running a little bit behind time, we're going to press straight on with the questions. Brexit, I mean, okay, it's over a year since we left, but many of the changes, of course, as most businesses will know, only came into operation at the beginning of the year. So after the change in the rules and regulations, and there is, I know, a bit of a grace period on some of them, what are the key pieces of knowledge that businesses importing or exporting to the EU need to know right now? Let me ask Tracy first, Managing Director for Import Export Support. What would you say? Clearly, there are lots of different rules, regulations, bits of paper. But what is the key knowledge that companies need if they are continuing to trade with the EU?
I think the key element is know your supply chain. So know who you are buying from and what you are buying from them. And I think that's the one key element that people can do a lot better than they're doing at the moment. So, you know, you might be buying from somebody in the UK, but those goods might come from France. You might be buying from somebody in France, but those goods are from US originally. It's really important that we understand the basis now that a trade agreement that we've got in place with the EU means that the way we used to trade with them has completely changed, and that now we need to consider where our goods are made and where it has actually undergone substantial transformation. It's not adequate now for you to buy from a French company and those goods be French, for example. And I think that's probably the biggest thing now, is actually that open communication, understanding where your goods are coming from. And, you know, and I think there's a really good point to be made here in terms of the opportunities for local businesses to actually stand to the fore and to be better than the rest of the country at this. And I think, you know, we do have a very good port infrastructure here. We are to Dover quite quickly. So, you know, there is a great opportunity if we understand our supply chains well enough to actually, you know, to step into the fore and, you know, put Norfolk on the map again as one of the best traders.
Richard Pace, you're clearly dealing with these issues on a daily basis. What would you say is the most important piece of knowledge for companies that are trading with Europe?
I think from an airport perspective, we don't do that much freight in and out of this airport. And from an aviation perspective, the regulations are pretty much the same as they were prior to exit. So, you know, for us as an airport in the region assisting export and import, it's very keen for us to re-establish our routes back to Amsterdam. So we were 4 times a day. We're now 4 times a week. And therefore, we were flying close to 160,000 people each way, which whilst we don't get involved with the import-export regulatory side of things, clearly we're an enabler of import and export into the EU. And we need a pathway back to being able to enable us to operate again once we get through the pandemic. Clearly, we understand the reason why we're all restricted, but we definitely need a pathway out from the government to get us back to where we can enable free flow of goods and services into the EU, particularly via Amsterdam, which is our main hub.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Let me bring in Kevin Walsh, UK Sales Director for LV Shipping. Presumably, this is something that you're dealing with all the time.
It is indeed, Carol, and greetings from the aforementioned Northern Powerhouse, first and foremost. I will preface that by saying our credentials. Yeah, well, one of our 10 UK offices actually is in Gorleston in Great Yarmouth, and my colleagues there are handling on a daily basis freight in and out of the county of Norfolk, whether that's trailers going out from Norwich to Naples or coming back from Cologne to Kings Lynn, and the one thing that is really sort of not necessarily lacking, but it's new to a lot of companies, and the one piece of information I would not only I would actually implore companies to become more familiar with is the notion of Incoterms. It's absolutely crucial now, as Tracy was talking about rules of origin. In addition to that, it's crucial that companies in Norfolk understand that the rules of the game have actually changed now in trading with Europe, and you really do need to know where your responsibilities lie with your European supplier or your European clients in terms of who's responsible for the freight, organising the transport, who's arranging any insurance that may be applicable, who ultimately is arranging the customs clearance. Because what we're finding is a lot of and it's on a daily basis. I've worked in this industry 30 years, and the last 5 weeks have been the most challenging, I can promise you, of that whole period. And we must ensure that our clients and the companies in Norfolk, as well as nationwide, understand what terms exactly they're dealing with now with the suppliers, and who is responsible for having goods entered in, because there was a huge preoccupation just before Christmas whether we'd have a deal or a no deal. Regardless of that, Carol, we were always leaving the customs union regardless of that, and that seems to have gone under the radar a little bit. And I would just urge companies to really refresh up, speak with your clients, speak with your suppliers, and know exactly who's responsible for what elements of that transport process in and out of the EU.
Do you find that many companies simply aren't sufficiently geared up for that?
I do actually, and that's notwithstanding tremendous efforts that certainly the Chambers of Commerce and other governmental organisations have made prior to us leaving the commercial the customs unit, and it's not, by the way, Carol, just UK companies or Norfolk-based companies. A lot of the European suppliers are the same. They're on a learning curve as well with this. It's okay if you've been dealing, like a lot of our clients in Norfolk have been dealing further afield than the EU, so they're quite familiar with the notion of customs clearance from China and from India and stuff like that. But a lot of companies haven't, and up until the back end of last year, you could ship from Durham to Dublin with the minimum amount of documentation, a minimum amount of. That's all changed now, and companies very quickly need to get their heads around that.
Leszek, do you think that your department and the government as a whole has really done enough to help businesses? I mean, it is quite notable what Kevin was just saying about a lot of companies that simply don't seem to have been sufficiently geared up.
Well, probably what I'd do is look at what the two previous speakers have said and take their points from a slightly different perspective. The importance of also reflecting on your existing contractual relationships with your customers and your suppliers. Incoterms is part of that. Customs borders is part of that, but also the actual invoicing and the contractual relationship between the parties is important. For example, customers in the past would have drop shipped in Europe from the UK on behalf of a distributor to the EU. That arrangement now, because of the hard border, has had to be reflected on, and new arrangements need to be put into place. So I'd agree with what the two speakers have said. I think there is a lot of reflection that even existing sort of companies will need to do on their existing relationships. With regards to your question on have we done enough, I don't think that we have done enough. One of the issues which we're faced with is the late sort of finalisation of the agreement, for want of a better word, just before Christmas, which really did mean that it's put the logistics companies and the customs consultancies really in the spotlight and made life very difficult for them. And I have to acknowledge that. But at the same time, we are doing everything we possibly can. There's 300 advisors like me across the UK trying to give advice to businesses out in the UK. Everyone is looking for advice. Everyone's looking for advice from freight forwarders. They're looking for advice from customs consultancies. They're looking for advice from Norfolk Chamber, and everybody's capacity to provide advice is limited simply because of the volume of questions that customers are asking.
Okay, lots of questions to get through. Peter Bussey has put a question in the Q&A box. I do urge you to do that if you're listening in at the moment. He says that shipping container costs have more than doubled and there are large delays at Felixstowe and at other ports. What is being done to alleviate this, to assist businesses who need these goods, and also to get shipping costs down before they can no longer be absorbed and consumer prices are increased? Kevin, would you like to address this query?
Yeah, I can do. Our UK hesitate to use the F word in a Norfolk-based forum, but our UK head office is at Felixstowe, so we're right on top of this. And I've been involved in a couple of webinars just recently where some of the major shipping lines operating out of the port have confirmed that they're in the process now, because the reason for these price hikes, certainly from the Far East, have been the lack of equipment, lack of empty equipment in China, due to COVID, due to the perfect storm of a whole host of elements. And what we're seeing now is several of the major shipping lines actually shipping the containers back empty to enable to have the stocks out there to facilitate UK imports. So I do think certainly after Chinese New Year as well, which has been slightly extended, I think it's from next week, for a week or so after, being slightly extended again to help this repositioning of equipment back into certainly the South China ports of Shenzhen, Hong Kong and Guangzhou and places like that, where a lot of certainly Norfolk importers are buying from and sourcing the goods from. So I do think we will see over the next 3 weeks, month or so, prices starting to come down, because let's face it, $14,000 for a 40-foot container from China to Felixstowe is not sustainable, and there's not many companies importing with a value of goods certainly that will sustain that.
I should have said that any of you who'd like to come in during any of these discussions, you can just raise your hand. You can either just do it visually or you can do it virtually with a little raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. I was going to bring in Tracy, though, on this one. What would you like to say on this query?
Really, it was not to do with the shipping containers, because I think, unfortunately, what Kevin's just answered that one with regards to the fact that it was supply and demand at the time, and we ended up in a position where we didn't have enough supply and a heck of a lot of demand, as everybody was trying to prepare for Brexit. And under COVID conditions, the amount of PPE that was being shipped into this country at certain points last year was eye-watering. So I think, in fairness, that was a set of circumstances, and we've seen it before, but we've never seen it to the level of, you know, the prices that are per container costs that we've got at the moment. What I was going to talk about was a little bit of sort of like light on the horizon, really, a little bit of positivity in all of this, in terms of thinking.
We always welcome that.
In terms of thinking about how we can manage this whole situation, in terms of, you know, I think what happened with Brexit when it came along was everybody thought a deal meant that business would carry on as usual with the EU. And I think what people never grasped was the reality that there was always going to be a border, there were always going to be customs declarations, which increased the administration around the border. There was also going to be new systems, and HMRC have implemented at least 3 new systems, electronic systems that I know of, some of which are not live yet. And that has created the most tremendous amount of learning knowledge. Plus, statistically, the number of import declarations and export declarations that are being created now at the border is 5-fold what it used to be. So we've also had to recruit a lot of new people into the business. So, you know, the people to do these declarations, people to actually manage this within the shipping companies and the like. And they're all learning, they're all new. COVID also put in the challenge of how do you train people remotely? How do you engage them? How do you make sure you've got the right recruitment? A lot of what we've been talking about earlier on, those challenges that we've had as the UK. So we have got a lot of new people out there, but that does bring with it opportunities for people to learn new skills, to go out there. There was a huge amount of government funding that you could get to train up to do customs declarations and to expand your teams, which I know a lot of my clients have taken advantage of. And on top of that, there are customs simplifications that will allow you not to get the double duty hit. So one of the things I would sort of say to people is, have a look at what's out there. And this year alone, I have got 4 people authorization for inward processing relief, which allows you to bring goods into the country, repair them and send them out again, or to do some work to them before you send them back out again without incurring duty. So there are things out there and tools that we can do, and they're not as scary as they seem to be. I always say to people, if I can do customs, anybody can. So, you know, there are things we can do, and it's just a case of having a look around, think about your business. And the point that Kevin and Leszek have both made is we need to understand our supply chains and what opportunities are within them to do it better.
We've got lots more questions, but I just wanted to bring Leszek in on this one. Those problems at Felixstowe, what, if anything, is the department doing to ease them? Are they just teething troubles, or is there going to be long-running issues such as we've seen there?
Well, I'd just like to probably reinforce what's already been said, which is the problems existed before Brexit, and they're partly COVID related. And it's just that they've come at the same time as Brexit. Obviously, the challenges of Brexit are increasing the challenges on the logistics industry as a whole, including Felixstowe. I think the problems are being treated very seriously. Our policy teams are looking at it, and it's going to the highest level within government. But you know, they're not the mechanics of getting the containers into the right places isn't something which we can easily manipulate.
Okay, lots more questions coming in. Let me take this one from Massimiliano Rossetti, who says, what about services, not goods? We're a touring arts company. Where do we go for advice and support on touring in the EU, as no one we've spoken to seems to know anything in detail? Richard, I mean, do you deal with many people like the touring arts companies? Clearly at the moment, nobody's able to do that, but that's something presumably you're going to have to be geared up for.
I can't give you specific advice on touring companies. What I can talk about is the fact we need to get passengers moving again, and that will include touring artists. It's very clear, as I said earlier, that we have to wait for the pandemic restrictions to be eased by the government, but we need a framework to get us out of there to allow quarantine-free travel, because that is essential to freedom of movement, or people traveling either way, including artists. So we're asking the government to produce a roadmap to enable aviation to restart in a meaningful way when it's appropriate to do so.
Yeah, Alice Whitney has come in and said that Brexit is putting a stop to the arts touring. There clearly is a big issue there. I mean, at the moment, nobody is touring anywhere, but that is something that is definitely going to be coming up as restrictions hopefully do ease in the spring. Let me take a question that was submitted in advance by Toby Wilson. He's saying, what's the biggest opportunity we have as a county outside the EU? While I've got you there, Richard, I mean, most of your connections really are into the EU, but clearly you would be hoping that Amsterdam, then is part of those connections to the wider world beyond.
Absolutely, we strongly encourage, and we have, in the past we've been a key enabler to go to the hub at Amsterdam. As I said, we work 4 times a day, and the biggest concern for us now is to get back to that connectivity level we had before. We need to recover back to that. Once in Amsterdam, you've got 500 destinations, or that was pre-2019 or pre-COVID levels, and therefore we are the region's global gateway to the world. And when you look at the government's agenda of not only levelling up the UK, but global Britain, then I think for the region, Norwich Airport plays a very significant part in connecting this region to the rest of the world in a very effective and efficient way. But we need to survive to get there. So we need to get short-term measures, not only the quarantine restrictions released and some sort of testing framework in place to allow travel to happen, but it needs to be coordinated. For example, at the moment, the Dutch government have banned UK flights right now. So until the Dutch government lift the restrictions on UK flights, then clearly that gateway is closed. So we need our government to work with international governments to have a common framework for testing. For example, the Dutch government were the first to insist on lateral flow test on departure, which is a new requirement which we are going to put in place to enable that to happen. But we need short-term financial support in the terms of business rates relief continuing, job retention scheme. So we are here for the longer term to support growth of the region into Europe and the world.
Leszek, we know that Liz Truss, another Norfolk MP, is working very hard to get lots of other international trade agreements. Where do you think the opportunities are for Norfolk? I mean, what sort of things should companies that perhaps are struggling at the moment, should they be lifting their sights and thinking ahead to further global trade deals beyond the EU?
Yeah, I do. And I think this links in with one of the sort of questions that was raised in the rebuilding the economy sort of session earlier about lack of finance. And at the moment, finance is difficult to get hold of. But I think UK Export Finance, which is our sister organisation, will have a key role to play in the future to enable companies to undertake good business all around the world. There's been a huge amount of resources put into UK Export Finance. It's probably increasing by about a third this coming year. They've got a number of executives around the world specifically looking at international opportunities. For example, there's 3 in Africa, one based in Kenya, one in Ghana, one in South Africa. We're getting 2 more executives coming on board in North Africa. And these people continuously look out for international opportunities. And you'd be surprised about the sort of help that they could provide a company which is in a good position to take advantage of those. For example, they can provide buyer finance. They can provide provide finance to help companies import products so that they can export them out the UK. So there's a wide variety of different forms of financial support that UK Export Finance can provide. And I really think that most exporters ought to become familiar with the organisation, as it will have a key role to play in international trade and a growing role over the coming 3 to 5 years.
Thank you very much for that. Let me bring in Kevin. I mean, clearly we've talked about some of the difficulties with international shipping, but are you then looking around and thinking, actually, there are lots of opportunities here, which various Norfolk businesses or big demands for certain Norfolk products even?
Well, there are absolutely, Carol, and in terms of our own industry, and this feeds back into Norfolk as well. I think we're showing quite an amount of adaptability and flexibility here, in so much as we're trying to circumnavigate the Dover-Calais mindset that there is, and that there are certain new services being introduced almost on a weekly basis now, which do away with that particular transit issue. You know, short sea container services, and I think, for example, as one of the panelists mentioned earlier, plates of strength, and in terms of the renewable industry in particular in Great Yarmouth, we've been involved in it many years. We've been involved in Sheringham Shoal, in Scroby Sands, in all these local developments down there, and you should be shouting about it, really, you know, because it's a world leading situation that you have there at Norfolk, and I know that my colleagues at Great Yarmouth are you know, very keen in trying to develop and shout along those lines. So long term, it's a positive situation, and I'm sure that these issues that we're having, with some tweaking here and there, will become second nature to us. I remember when the first customs system was introduced in the most recent one in '91. It was the worst nightmare ever. Then things will ease with time. It's just particularly challenging at the moment.
And we know that we've got a lot of very innovative and a lot of very proactive and adaptable businesses. Tracy Renshaw, just a final thought from you on, you provide import-export support. Do you think there are lots of opportunities out there despite all the current difficulties?
I do, and I believe that, you know, the nature of the inquiries I'm getting at the moment, there's a lot of local companies that are now thinking, well, how do I do this? And maybe people might comment it's a bit late to be thinking about how you do it, but it isn't too late. And as I was saying earlier, you know, the local company in Thetford that recently applied for inward processing relief, you know, normally that used to take HMRC about 6 weeks to authorise. We got it through in 2 weeks. So we were able to sort of fast track these things through. So HMRC are working really hard to facilitate enterprise in the UK. We've just got to ask, and, you know, we've got to make sure that we understand what we're doing and that we get it right, and we engage with the right partners. So, you know, there are, as we're saying, there's a lot of new people in the market out there, but, you know, let's make sure that we've got the trusted people that can actually do it. So, you know, the likes of LV Shipping that do the whole piece for you. I think it's useful, and it's great to see that, you know, they're supporting the local businesses to do that, and recruiting locally in order to be able to do that. So, you know, find the right partners and look, they're on your doorstep, and we're here to help, definitely.
Well, that's wonderfully. Yeah, let me just a final word to you, Leszek. Do come in.
I think that's one of the great advantages of being being in business in Norfolk, is that the business support services are quite well integrated. Everybody's got a desire to help the business, whether it's to pass on to somebody else who knows more about the subject than yourself, or to help them in other ways. We all work together, and I think that is one of the dynamic features of Norfolk business.
Thank you very much for that. Leszek Wysotsky from the International Trade Advisor for the Department of International Trade, Richard Pace from Norwich Airport, Tracy Renshaw from Import-Export Support, and Kevin Walsh from LV Shipping. Thank you all very much indeed for that fascinating discussion. I know we've overrun a little bit, but there was so much to talk about, and we were perhaps a little late coming into it. So a big virtual round of applause to all our panelists, and thank you so much for all your contributions, and apologies if I didn't get round to your question. I apologize. There was lots and lots to get through. Well, thank you all very much for contributing, for submitting your questions. It is now time to wrap the event up. Thank you all for joining us. I've certainly found it absolutely fascinating and given me a real insight into just some of the ways that some of the businesses and individuals are working across my own home county. And I'd like to welcome back Nova Fairbank from Norfolk Chambers of Commerce. Nova.
Thank you, Carol. That's excellent. I'm having slight snag. I cannot start the video, so apologies for anybody that can't see me. You don't need me to see me for me to do this bit. I'd just like to say before we leave, a huge thank you to all of our panelists this afternoon. They've done a fantastic job and given us plenty of food for thought. Please do give them one last virtual round of applause, please. I'd also like to say thank you to our event sponsor, Greater Anglia, and thank you very much to our superb host, Carol Walker, who managed to deliver a fantastic piece of hosting despite some IT and lighting challenges. We are continuously evolving and improving our event series. So can we please ask you to complete the event survey? The link is now in the chat, and it will only take a couple of minutes for you to give us your feedback and help us shape our future events. We're also pleased to announce that we've already finalised the date for the Big Debate 2022. It will be taking place on Friday, the 4th of February. So please do make sure that you can save this date. Thank you again, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much, everybody.